What if you suddenly lost everything, your health, your independence, your ability to take care of yourself, and no one was there to help? The question hung in the air, like a whisper just before the storm. It was a thought that had crossed the mind of every person at some point in their life, but for Rose Andrews, it wasn't just a hypothetical scenario. It was a reality that was creeping closer every day. Rose was a proud, independent woman. She had spent her entire life taking care of others, her children, her husband, and even her elderly parents before they passed. But as she entered her early 70s, things started to change. The small, daily signs of aging began to appear, her energy was lower, her once perky stride had slowed, and she found herself struggling to keep up with the routines she had always taken for granted. But what bothered her the most was the feeling of dizziness that had been creeping up on her in recent months. It wasn't just that she was getting tired more easily, there were moments when she felt like the world was spinning around her. And on one particular morning, it all came to a head. Rose had woken up early, as she always did. It was a habit that ran deep in her, passed down from years of managing a household and caring for her late husband, John. She shuffled to the kitchen, feeling the familiar ache in her joints, but it wasn't anything she couldn't handle. She had been through far worse. But today was different. As she reached for the cereal box, a sharp pain shot through her head. The world around her started to blur. Her legs wobbled, and before she could grab the counter for support, she collapsed onto the floor. The kitchen, once so comforting and familiar, now felt like a cold, foreign place. It wasn't the first time she had felt faint. But this time, something felt different. More intense. More dangerous. She tried to push herself up, but her limbs were uncooperative. For a moment, all she could hear was the sound of her breath, shallow and fast, as the dizziness grew worse. It was then that Emma, her daughter, burst into the room, having been staying with her for the past few weeks after Rose's recent health concerns. She had been worried about her mother's increasing forgetfulness and the way she had been dismissing her blood pressure medications. Emma had noticed the signs: low energy, frequent complaints about headaches, and the persistent dizziness that Rose had been brushing off as just a part of getting older. "Mom! Are you okay?" Emma cried, rushing to her side. I'm fine," Rose stammered, trying to sit up. "It's just a little dizzy spell, Emma. It'll pass." But Emma wasn't buying it. She had seen the signs too many times before, and the look in her mother's eyes, frail, confused, and a little lost, was enough to make her heart drop into her stomach. "You're not fine, Mom. You're not fine," Emma said, her voice trembling. "We need to get you to the doctor. Now." Rose wanted to argue, to insist that she was fine, that she could handle it on her own. But deep down, she knew the truth. She had been ignoring the warning signs, pushing her health to the back burner in favor of keeping up with her daily routine. She didn't want to face the reality that her body was no longer as invincible as it once had been. As Emma helped her mother into the car and drove her to the doctor's office, Rose couldn't shake the feeling of dread that had settled over her. Was this the beginning of the end? She had always prided herself on her resilience, but now, sitting in the passenger seat of her daughter's car, she felt vulnerable. Helpless. For the first time in a long while, she didn't know what to do. When they arrived at the doctor's office, Rose's blood pressure was checked immediately. The nurse frowned as she took the reading. "It's a bit high, Rose," the nurse said, her tone calm but concerned. "We'll get the doctor in to talk to you." As the doctor entered the room and reviewed her charts, Rose felt a lump form in her throat. She had always been proud of her health, always believed that with the right mindset, you could overcome anything. But now, the doctor was sitting in front of her, giving her the cold hard facts. "Rose," the doctor began, "your blood pressure is much higher than it should be for someone your age. And from the symptoms you've been describing, headaches, dizziness, and occasional shortness of breath, it's clear that this has been going on for a while. We need to talk about how we can bring it under control before it gets worse." Rose felt a wave of disbelief wash over her. This wasn't how she had imagined her future. She thought she had plenty of time to enjoy her retirement, to spend time with her children, to travel with John before he passed. But now, her health was becoming a constant worry. She had made some dangerous assumptions about her body's ability to handle the pressures of getting older, and those assumptions had led her down a path of neglect. But she wasn't ready to give up yet. "Is there anything I can do to fix it?" Rose asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The doctor gave her a reassuring smile. "Yes, absolutely. We can get your blood pressure under control with some lifestyle changes, medication, and a better understanding of how your body is responding to these changes. But we have to start now. The sooner we act, the better." Rose nodded slowly, still in shock. She knew that she couldn't ignore her health any longer. Her body was no longer the reliable, steady force she had once known. But there was a spark of hope in the doctor's words. There was still time to turn things around. As she left the doctor's office that day, Emma held her mother's hand, her face filled with concern. "We'll get through this together, Mom," she said softly. Rose looked at her daughter, feeling a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She had been so stubborn for so long, convinced that she could handle everything on her own. But now, it was clear that she needed help. And maybe, just maybe, she had the chance to make things right. "I'm scared, Emma," Rose admitted quietly. "I know, Mom," Emma replied, squeezing her hand. "But you're not alone. We'll figure this out." And as they walked to the car, Rose realized that for the first time in a long while, she wasn't just going to fight this battle on her own. She had her daughter, her family, and now, a team of doctors who were determined to help her regain control of her health. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but at least she wasn't facing it alone. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Rose Andrews had always been the rock of her family. She was the kind of woman who never backed down from a challenge, always looking for ways to keep moving forward, no matter the obstacle. Born and raised in a small town in Pennsylvania, Rose had learned the importance of hard work and resilience from an early age. Her parents had instilled in her the belief that you could weather any storm if you just kept your head down and did what needed to be done. And for most of her life, that's exactly what Rose did. She married John Andrews when she was 23, a tall, kind man with a gentle smile that always made her heart flutter. Together, they built a life full of love, laughter, and memories. Rose was a dedicated wife and mother to 2 children, Emma and Liam. John worked as a mechanic, and Rose stayed home, managing the household, taking care of the children, and making sure everything ran smoothly. She often joked that she could keep a house running like clockwork, no matter the challenges life threw at her. Their home was always filled with warmth. The walls echoed with the sound of children's laughter, music, and the clinking of dishes during family dinners. Rose was the glue that held everything together, whether it was organizing family events, planning vacations, or offering a listening ear when her children needed advice. She was a nurturer by nature, always putting others before herself. But life, as it often does, changed. John's health began to deteriorate in his late 50s. He had always been active, but his body started to betray him as he entered his 60s. Heart disease ran in his family, and he had spent the last decade ignoring small signs that his own heart was struggling. Eventually, John suffered a heart attack, which changed everything for the Andrews family. Rose became a caretaker overnight, helping her husband recover from surgery, managing his medications, and adjusting their lifestyle to accommodate his new limitations. It was a role she never expected to take on, but it was one she embraced wholeheartedly. She took the lead, made sure John followed his doctor's orders, and did everything she could to help him get better. Though John's heart never fully recovered, Rose remained steadfast. She never complained, never showed weakness. Her mantra was always, "You do what you have to do." And she did. The years that followed were filled with doctor's visits, medications, and constant worry. But Rose continued to take care of her family, just as she always had. Then, just a few years ago, John passed away. His death hit Rose harder than she expected. She had been so focused on taking care of him, so immersed in their routine of hospital visits and checkups, that she hadn't fully grasped how much he had been a part of her life. He had been her partner for over 40 years, and with his passing, it felt like a piece of her own soul had been torn away. After the funeral, Rose felt an overwhelming emptiness that she hadn't anticipated. The house that had once been full of life and energy now felt quiet and lonely. She had devoted so much of her life to taking care of John that she had neglected her own well-being. She realized, too late, that she had been so focused on making sure everyone else was okay that she had forgotten to take care of herself. The thought was jarring, almost like a slap in the face. Over time, she began to notice subtle changes in her own body. She was tired more often, her joints ached, and she struggled to keep up with the housework that once seemed so simple. It wasn't until she started experiencing those dizzy spells, though, that she realized just how much her health had deteriorated. It wasn't easy for Rose to admit that she was no longer the person she once was. She had always prided herself on her independence, her ability to handle anything life threw at her. But as her body began to fail her, she had to confront the reality that she wasn't invincible. And that's where Emma, her daughter, stepped in. Emma had always been Rose's right hand, but she had grown increasingly concerned over the past year. The once vibrant, energetic woman she had known seemed to be fading before her eyes. Emma noticed that Rose wasn't as quick to get out of bed in the morning, that she was often winded after simple tasks, and that she seemed more forgetful than usual. Emma didn't want to push too hard, but the signs were impossible to ignore. She remembered the times when Rose had always been the first to tell her to take care of herself, to prioritize health and well-being. But now, her mother wasn't even taking her own advice. Emma had tried to get her to go to the doctor, but Rose would wave her off, telling her that it was just part of getting older. She refused to acknowledge the importance of regular checkups, especially when it came to her blood pressure. Rose thought that her high blood pressure was something she could control by simply eating better and getting more exercise. But Emma knew better. It wasn't just about eating more vegetables or taking a daily walk, it was about understanding the intricate balance of her health, managing her blood pressure, and staying ahead of potential complications. Emma understood the risks of ignoring blood pressure problems, especially at Rose's age. Hypertension could lead to heart disease, stroke, and kidney failure, and it was a silent killer. But Rose wasn't ready to listen. Not until that fateful morning when she collapsed in the kitchen. Emma had always feared that something like that might happen, and when it finally did, her fears became a reality. Rose had brushed aside all of Emma's concerns, telling her that she was just getting old. But as she sat in the emergency room, waiting for the results of her tests, Rose couldn't help but wonder if she had made a mistake by ignoring her health for so long. Emma sat next to her mother, squeezing her hand in reassurance. "Mom, we'll get through this together. I'm here for you, no matter what." Rose squeezed her daughter's hand back, a tear slipping down her cheek. She had always been the strong one, the one who held everything together. But now, in her moment of weakness, she realized that she didn't have to be strong alone. She had Emma, and that made all the difference. Rose sat in the sterile waiting room of her doctor's office, fidgeting with her hands. The smooth surface of the chair felt cold against her skin. Her mind raced as she tried to push back the nagging doubts that had taken root in her thoughts. She had always prided herself on being strong, being self-sufficient, but now, she felt vulnerable, exposed in a way she had never experienced before. The nurse had already taken her vitals, and her blood pressure was still higher than it should have been. But this wasn't just about the numbers. Rose had ignored the signs for too long, and now, they were catching up with her. She had always been the one to take care of everyone else, to put others first, but now it was her own health that demanded attention, and she couldn't avoid it any longer. Emma had insisted that she come to the doctor after that morning's dizzy spell, but Rose had resisted. She didn't want to admit that something was wrong. She didn't want to face the possibility that her health was failing her. But here she was, sitting in the waiting room, waiting for the doctor to confirm what she already knew deep down: her health was in trouble, and she had to do something about it. "Mrs. Andrews?" The voice of the receptionist interrupted her thoughts. Rose looked up and saw the nurse motioning for her to follow. The doctor's office was just as clinical as the rest of the building: bright lights, white walls, and the faint smell of antiseptic. It was a far cry from the warmth of her own home, and Rose felt a sudden pang of homesickness. She longed for the days when everything had felt secure, when her health wasn't something she had to worry about. But those days were gone. The doctor, a middle-aged man named Dr. Carter, walked into the room with a clipboard in his hand. He was a calm, reassuring presence, but Rose could see the concern in his eyes as he reviewed her chart. "Hello, Mrs. Andrews," he said, offering a warm smile. "I see you're still having some trouble with your blood pressure. Let's talk about that, shall we?" Rose nodded, her throat tight. "I don't know what happened," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've always been healthy. I've never had any real problems. But lately, I've been feeling off." Dr. Carter pulled up a chair and sat beside her. "Tell me about your symptoms. I know you've mentioned dizziness, but have you noticed anything else? Headaches? Shortness of breath? Any chest pain?" Rose hesitated. It was hard to admit just how much she had been ignoring. The dizziness had started months ago, but she had chalked it up to stress. After John's death, she had thrown herself into the routine of life, trying to fill the void he left behind. But now, the signs couldn't be ignored. "I've had headaches on and off. And sometimes, I get really tired. More than usual. And, sometimes my heart races, and I feel out of breath, like I'm going to pass out." Dr. Carter took careful notes, nodding as he listened. "It sounds like you've been experiencing a number of concerning symptoms, Mrs. Andrews. I'm glad you came in today. We're going to take this seriously, okay? Your blood pressure readings have been consistently high for the past few months, and based on what you've described, we need to act quickly." Rose swallowed hard. "What do you mean by act quickly? Is it really that bad?" "Unfortunately, yes," Dr. Carter said gently. "Your high blood pressure, combined with your symptoms, suggests that you're at risk for some serious complications: heart disease, stroke, kidney damage. But the good news is, we can treat it. It's not too late. With the right treatment plan, we can get your blood pressure under control and reduce the risks." Rose's heart sank. She had always assumed that the worst would never happen to her, that she could somehow avoid the complications of aging. But now, as she looked at Dr. Carter, she knew that her health had reached a tipping point. It wasn't just about taking a few pills or changing her diet, it was about rethinking everything. "Okay," she said, her voice barely audible. "What do I need to do?" Dr. Carter smiled reassuringly. "We're going to start with medication to help lower your blood pressure. But that's just the beginning. We also need to make some lifestyle changes: diet, exercise, stress management. I know it's a lot to take in, but you're not alone in this. We're going to work together to get you back on track." Rose felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't the answer she had wanted to hear, but it was the answer she needed. She had spent so much time avoiding the truth, convincing herself that everything would be fine if she just kept going. But now, the truth was clear. She had to take control of her health, or else risk losing everything she had worked so hard to build. "Thank you, Dr. Carter," Rose said, feeling a sense of gratitude for the first time in a long while. "I'll do whatever it takes." As she left the doctor's office, Emma was waiting for her outside, her face filled with concern. "How did it go? What did the doctor say?" Rose sighed, her shoulders heavy with the weight of the conversation she had just had. He said, "It's serious, Emma. My blood pressure is too high, and I've been ignoring the signs for too long. I need to take medication and make some big changes. But he said I can still turn things around." Emma's face softened, and she pulled her mother into a hug. "We'll get through this together, Mom. I'm here for you." Rose clung to her daughter, the reality of the situation settling in. She had always been the one who took care of everyone else, but now, she was the one who needed help. For the first time, Rose felt vulnerable, but she also felt a glimmer of hope. She wasn't alone in this fight. As they walked to the car, Emma's arm around her shoulder, Rose looked up at the sky. It was a gray, overcast day, but she knew that even the darkest clouds eventually cleared. She wasn't sure how long it would take, but she was determined to face this challenge head-on. The road ahead would be difficult, but she wasn't going to back down. Not this time. And as they drove home, Rose's mind raced with thoughts of the future, the changes she would need to make, the sacrifices she would have to endure, but also the possibility of reclaiming her health, her independence, and her life. For the first time in a long while, she felt like there was hope on the horizon. The weeks that followed Rose's doctor's visit felt like a blur. For the first time in years, she was forced to slow down and acknowledge the toll that neglecting her health had taken. The medications Dr. Carter prescribed were helpful, but they came with their own set of challenges. There were side effects to deal with, dizziness, fatigue, and the occasional headache, which only made Rose feel more defeated. She had always prided herself on being strong and capable, but now, she felt anything but. Each day was a battle, and she wasn't sure if she was winning. Emma continued to be her steadfast support, accompanying her to doctor's appointments, helping her manage her new medication regimen, and even cooking meals that adhered to the strict diet Dr. Carter had recommended. Still, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that she was failing in some way. She had always been the one who looked after others, but now, she was the one who needed looking after. It was a humbling experience, one she wasn't sure how to accept. The hardest part wasn't the medication or the changes in her diet. It was the sense of loss. She had always been active, walking around her neighborhood every day, tending to her garden, keeping up with the housework. But now, she found herself sitting more often, feeling winded after simple tasks, and struggling to get through the day. It was a far cry from the vibrant woman she once was. It was hard to look in the mirror and see someone who felt so fragile. But Rose wasn't one to give up easily. Every morning, she set her alarm an hour earlier than usual, determined to get a walk in before the day started. At first, she could only manage a short walk around the block, her heart pounding in her chest and her legs aching with every step. But slowly, very slowly, she began to feel stronger. It wasn't much, but it was something. A sign that she could still make progress, even if it was just a small step. One morning, as she walked down the familiar streets of her neighborhood, she noticed something she hadn't seen in years, the sun peeking through the clouds, casting a warm glow over the trees and rooftops. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it felt significant. For the first time in a while, Rose felt like she was moving toward something, instead of just being stuck in place. As the weeks turned into months, Rose's progress was undeniable. She was still tired at the end of the day, but the dizziness had faded, and her blood pressure was starting to stabilize. It wasn't perfect yet, but it was better. And that small improvement made all the difference in the world. But just as things seemed to be improving, a new challenge arose. One afternoon, while Rose was at home preparing lunch, she received a phone call from Emma. Her voice was strained, and there was a sense of urgency in her tone. "Mom, it's Liam," she said. "He's been in an accident." Rose's heart dropped into her stomach. "What happened? Is he okay?" "He's in the hospital," Emma replied. "He broke his leg, and they're doing some tests to make sure there's no internal bleeding. I'm on my way there now. I just wanted to let you know." Rose's hands trembled as she hung up the phone. Her first instinct was to jump in the car and rush to the hospital, but she stopped herself. It had only been a few months since her own health scare, and she wasn't sure if she was in good enough shape to drive for long periods of time. The idea of getting behind the wheel and possibly fainting or having a dizzy spell while on the road terrified her. She sat down at the kitchen table, her mind racing. Liam was her youngest, her baby boy. She had been there for him through everything, his first steps, his first day of school, his heartaches and triumphs. And now, she couldn't even be there when he needed her most. It wasn't fair. Emma's voice broke through her thoughts. "Mom, are you okay? I can't get a hold of you. Please, just stay calm. I'll keep you updated, okay?" Rose squeezed the phone tightly in her hand. "I'm fine, Emma. Just give me a minute, okay? I'll be okay." But she wasn't sure if she was. The anxiety, the helplessness, and the overwhelming fear that she couldn't be there for her son in the way she had always been for him, it felt like it was all closing in on her. She wanted to be strong, to be the mom who could hold everything together. But in that moment, she wasn't sure if she could. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. "You can do this," she whispered to herself. "You fought for yourself. You can fight for him too." A few minutes later, Rose grabbed her keys and made her way out the door. She wasn't sure how far she would get, but she was going to try. She needed to see her son. He needed her, and she wasn't going to let her health, whatever state it was in, get in the way of that. The drive to the hospital was long, and the pain in her legs made it hard to focus. But she pushed through. She had to. When she finally arrived at the emergency room, she was greeted by Emma, who had a worried but relieved expression on her face. "Mom, you made it," she said, her voice trembling. "Liam's going to be okay. He just needs surgery on his leg, but it's not as bad as we thought." Rose let out a shaky breath. Thank God. She followed Emma to Liam's room, where her son was lying in a bed, a cast on his leg and bandages on his head. He looked up at her as she entered, a faint smile on his face. "Hey, Mom," he said softly, his voice hoarse. "I guess I'm not invincible after all." Rose smiled, her heart swelling with pride. "You're tougher than you think," she said, brushing a lock of hair away from his forehead. "And you're going to get through this." But as she sat beside her son, holding his hand, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that she had just faced her biggest test yet. Her health had been a struggle, but now, she was facing the overwhelming pressure of being there for her family while also taking care of herself. It was a delicate balance, one that felt impossible to maintain. But Rose knew one thing: she wasn't going to give up. Not now. Not ever. The days following Liam's accident felt like an emotional roller coaster for Rose. As much as she tried to focus on her own health and recovery, the chaos of her son's injury consumed her. She spent most of her time at the hospital, making sure Liam had everything he needed, from his favorite snacks to comforting words. Emma, of course, was her rock, always there to lend a hand and keep the situation from spiraling out of control. But despite their best efforts, Rose couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing, that she was still, in some way, failing her son. Liam's surgery went well, but recovery was going to take time. He couldn't put weight on his leg for weeks, and that meant long days of sitting in a hospital room, boredom creeping in as the days dragged by. Rose tried to be the upbeat, encouraging mother, but there were moments when the fatigue hit her hard. Her own health was still fragile, and every time she reached for the strength to lift Liam's spirits, she felt as if her own reserve of energy was running low. The emotional strain became overwhelming. One afternoon, as Rose sat beside Liam's hospital bed, her mind wandered back to the time when she was healthy and strong. When she had been the one who was always there for everyone else, the one who held everything together. She missed that version of herself, the version that could juggle 1,000 things at once without breaking a sweat. But now, every step forward felt like a monumental effort. "I hate this, Mom," Liam said suddenly, breaking her thoughts. His voice was a mixture of frustration and sadness. "I hate having to depend on everyone. I feel so useless." Rose's heart ached at his words. She could see the helplessness in his eyes, the same way she had felt when she had first started struggling with her own health. The guilt of not being able to be the strong, independent person she once was weighed heavily on her shoulders. "You're not useless, Liam," Rose said softly, squeezing his hand. "Sometimes, we all need help. It's not weakness, it's part of being human. And you're going to come out of this stronger, I promise you that." But despite her words, a wave of doubt washed over her. The fight to keep herself healthy and be there for her family felt like too much at times. It was in these moments that she realized something. She had been so focused on pushing through her struggles alone that she hadn't fully accepted help from the people around her, the people who wanted to be there for her. The realization hit her like a ton of bricks. She had always prided herself on being self-sufficient, but in doing so, she had distanced herself from the very people who cared about her most. She had kept her vulnerability hidden, believing that if she showed any weakness, it would be a sign of failure. But now, sitting beside her son in the hospital room, she saw how misguided that belief had been. "Liam," Rose said, her voice trembling. "I've been so focused on trying to be strong for everyone that I've forgotten to let people help me. But I need to change that. You're not the only one who's struggling with feeling helpless. I'm struggling too, and that's okay." Liam turned to her, his eyes wide. "Mom, I didn't know you felt that way." Rose smiled softly, brushing a tear from her cheek. "I've tried so hard to hide it, but I can't anymore. I'm scared, Liam. I'm scared that I'm not strong enough to get through this, and that I won't be able to be the mom you need me to be. But I'm learning that it's okay to lean on people. I have to let you help me, just like you're letting me help you." The tears that had been building up in Rose's chest finally spilled over, and for the first time in a long while, she let herself cry, really cry, without holding back. And Liam, despite his own struggles, reached out and pulled her into an embrace, holding her tightly as she sobbed in his arms. It was a raw, beautiful moment. A moment of realization, of vulnerability, and of connection. And in that moment, Rose knew that her journey to recovery wasn't just about her own health, it was about learning to lean on the people she loved, and letting them lean on her in return. The weight of trying to do everything on her own had been suffocating, but now, she felt a sense of relief in letting go of the burden. As they sat together, wrapped in each other's embrace, Rose's thoughts shifted. Yes, her health was still a challenge, and yes, she still had a long way to go. But she was no longer alone in her fight. And that, in itself, was a victory. The days that followed Rose's emotional breakthrough with Liam were filled with quiet reflection. Her tears had not been a sign of weakness, as she had once thought, but rather a sign of her growing strength. She had learned that true strength didn't come from enduring everything alone, but from acknowledging when you needed help and allowing yourself to accept it. The weight of this realization didn't immediately take away the fear or the uncertainty she felt about her health, but it gave her a new sense of purpose. Liam's recovery was slow, but steady. He was still stuck in his hospital bed for the time being, but Rose could see the spark of hope returning in his eyes. He had always been resilient, and although he hated feeling helpless, he was beginning to understand that there was no shame in depending on others. He had seen his mother fight to stay strong, and now, he was fighting in his own way, learning to let go of his pride and accept help when it was needed. At home, Rose continued her own path toward recovery. It wasn't easy. Every step, whether it was taking a walk around the block or cooking dinner for herself, felt like a small victory. Some days were harder than others. There were days when the fatigue weighed heavily on her, and the stress of managing her health combined with the demands of caring for Liam made it feel like too much. But with each day, she grew stronger, and more importantly, she began to embrace the support system around her. Her daughter Emma had become a constant source of comfort. The two of them spent hours together in the evenings, chatting over cups of tea, sharing stories, and laughing together like they hadn't done in years. Emma, who had always been her steady presence, was now not just her daughter but also her best friend. The bond they shared was something Rose had never truly appreciated until now. Emma had always been there for her, but it was only now that Rose truly saw the depth of Emma's care and the strength of her presence in Rose's life. On one particularly quiet evening, Emma sat with her mother on the back porch, both of them watching the sunset as the sky turned pink and orange. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, Mom," Emma began, her voice soft. "About how you always tried to be strong for us, but you didn't want to let anyone help. I just want you to know, we're here for you. We always have been." Rose turned to her daughter, her heart swelling with gratitude. "I know, sweetie. I've just always felt like I needed to be the one to take care of everything. It's hard for me to let go of that role, but I'm starting to see that I don't have to do everything alone. And I'm so thankful that you're here." Emma smiled and put her arm around Rose's shoulder. "You don't have to be the strong one all the time, Mom. You've done so much for us, and now it's our turn to take care of you. You don't need to carry the weight of the world on your shoulders anymore." Rose leaned into her daughter's embrace, closing her eyes as she felt the weight of her years of self-reliance slowly lift. The love and support she had been afraid to lean on was right there, surrounding her. It was both humbling and healing. Over the next few weeks, Rose began to make noticeable improvements in her health. Her blood pressure stabilized, her energy levels increased, and although the road to full recovery was still long, she felt a renewed sense of hope. She started to take on more activities around the house, gradually regaining her confidence. She even began to experiment with some simple yoga stretches in the mornings, a practice that helped with both her body and her mind. Liam, too, was making strides. He was now out of the hospital and back at home, though still on crutches. But his recovery was progressing well, and Rose could see the old spark in his eyes. He was determined, just like his mother, and he was beginning to understand the importance of pacing himself and accepting help when it was needed. Their mutual journey toward healing had become a powerful shared experience, and they both learned lessons about strength and vulnerability. One evening, as Rose and Liam sat together on the couch, watching a movie, Rose felt a sense of peace she hadn't experienced in months. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the television and the occasional rustle of popcorn. She glanced over at her son, who was laughing at something on screen. "You know, Liam," Rose said softly, "I never thought I'd be in a place where I couldn't do everything for myself. But I've learned that it's okay to ask for help. And it's okay to rest, even when you feel like you should be doing more." Liam looked at her, his eyes thoughtful. "I get it now, Mom. You've always taught me to be strong, but you've also shown me that being strong doesn't mean doing everything on your own. It means knowing when to ask for help, and when to lean on the people who care about you." Rose smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She hadn't realized how much she had taught him until now. "Exactly. And I'm proud of you, Liam. You've learned that lesson earlier than I did." They sat together in comfortable silence, the weight of their shared experiences settling over them like a blanket. Rose knew the journey wasn't over, but she also knew that they had both grown in ways they couldn't have imagined before. The road to healing was long, and it wasn't always easy, but with the love of her family and the strength she had found within herself, Rose felt ready to face whatever came next. As the weeks turned into months, Rose began to feel like she was regaining control over her life, but she also understood that life had a way of throwing curveballs at you when you least expected them. While she had come to accept her health challenges and had made peace with needing help, the unexpected still had a way of shaking her to her core. One Saturday afternoon, as the warmth of early spring bathed her home in golden sunlight, Rose decided to tackle a small project around the house. She had always prided herself on her meticulous gardening, and after months of feeling too unwell to do anything, she had a sudden surge of energy. The garden, which had once been a place of pride, had fallen into disrepair during her health struggles. Now, she felt it was time to reclaim it. The soil was still damp from recent rain, and the sight of her neglected plant stirred a sense of determination in her. Rose, despite all the progress she had made, still loved the idea of being in control of the little things. Her garden was a part of her, her sanctuary. She grabbed her gardening gloves, a trowel, and a small bucket to collect weeds, and ventured outside, feeling the gentle breeze on her skin. She knelt down and started pulling weeds, each tug grounding her back into something that felt familiar, something that was still hers. As the minutes passed, she became engrossed in the rhythm of her work, the laborious but peaceful task of preparing the soil. But just as she was about to take a break, Rose's phone buzzed in her pocket. She stood up, wiping her hands on her jeans before pulling the phone out. It was a message from Emma. "Mom, we need to talk. It's important." Rose's heart skipped a beat. A sinking feeling hit her stomach. Emma rarely sent urgent texts like this. "What's going on?" she replied, her hands suddenly trembling slightly. The response came quickly, "It's Liam. I think something's wrong with his leg. I don't want to alarm you, but I think he's in pain again." Rose's pulse quickened. Her mind immediately raced back to the accident, the hospital, and all the fears she had buried beneath the surface. She knew she had to stay calm, but panic had a way of creeping into her thoughts. Without a second thought, Rose dropped everything, her trowel, the gloves, the garden that she had been so eager to fix, and rushed to her car. Despite the progress she had made with her health, the thought of losing control over the situation again felt like a punch to the gut. She had only just started to regain a sense of peace, and now, here was another reminder that life had a way of spinning out of control. The drive to Emma's house felt long. Every turn, every stoplight seemed to take forever, and the unease in her stomach only grew. It wasn't that she doubted her son's resilience. Liam had always been strong, and he had made great progress after his surgery. But what if something had gone wrong? What if the pain he was experiencing meant something more? She couldn't shake the image of her son back in the hospital, confined to a bed again. She wasn't ready to face that. She wasn't ready to see him struggle like that again. By the time she pulled into Emma's driveway, she was already bracing herself for bad news. She hurried inside, only to find Emma sitting on the couch, holding Liam's hand, and Liam looking at her with an expression that was a mix of frustration and discomfort. "What happened?" Rose asked, her voice strained with concern. Liam looked up at her and forced a smile. "It's not what you think, Mom. It's just, my leg hurts again. I think I overdid it yesterday when I tried to walk around without crutches. I guess I wasn't as ready as I thought." Rose exhaled in relief, but the worry lines on her face didn't ease completely. "Why didn't you tell me right away? You know you don't need to be so stubborn, right?" "I didn't want to worry you," Liam admitted quietly, looking at the ground. Rose sat down beside him, gently touching his shoulder. "Liam, I know you don't want to depend on anyone, but you have to let us help you. You don't have to go through this alone." Emma, who had been silently observing, nodded. "We're here for you, Liam. We want to make sure you heal properly, not just get through it on your own." The conversation that followed was one of vulnerability and understanding. Liam, although reluctant to admit it, acknowledged that he had been pushing himself too hard. Rose, in turn, shared more openly with him about the struggles she had faced in accepting help. The exchange was cathartic for both of them, as they confronted the realities of recovery, not just physical, but emotional as well. As the evening unfolded, Rose began to realize something important. No matter how much she tried to plan and regain control, life would always have its ups and downs. But she didn't have to navigate them alone. The support of her family, of Emma and Liam, was something she could lean on, no matter how chaotic things might seem. The next day, Rose helped Liam adjust his crutches and reminded him to take it slow. She couldn't help but smile at how far they had both come in their individual journeys. Yes, they had both been through their fair share of struggles, but they had also emerged stronger for it. They had learned that healing wasn't just a physical process, it was an emotional one, too. And just as she had reclaimed the rhythm of her gardening, Rose knew she could find balance in other areas of her life. Life would continue to throw the unexpected her way, but now, she was learning how to face it with open arms and an open heart. She didn't need to control everything. She just needed to trust that, together, they could handle whatever came next. As the sun began to set that evening, painting the sky with hues of purple and gold, Rose sat in her backyard again, watching Liam and Emma laugh together on the porch. For the first time in a long while, Rose felt at peace. Her garden might not be perfect, but neither was her life. And that was okay. Sometimes, the beauty of life was in its imperfections. And as Rose sat there with her family, she realized that no matter what challenges came their way, they would always face them together. The days after Liam's setback were quiet, but they carried a new understanding between him and Rose. She had always been the one who took charge of their lives, making sure everything was running smoothly, even if it meant putting her own needs aside. But now, as she watched her son's journey toward healing unfold, she began to see that it wasn't just about recovery, it was about learning how to be present, both in the tough moments and the easy ones. Over the next few weeks, the family settled into a new rhythm. Liam was recovering well, and although he was frustrated by the slow pace, he started to take the advice they'd all given him more seriously. No longer trying to push himself beyond his limits, he followed the doctor's orders, resting when needed and attending physical therapy. His progress was encouraging, but the emotional healing was just as important as the physical. It was during these weeks that Rose began to realize how much she had been living in the past, clinging to old routines and expectations that no longer served her. The constant drive to fix things and control her environment, from her health to her family's well-being, had been exhausting. It wasn't that she was giving up, it was that she was learning to let go of the things she couldn't control. And in doing so, she found a new kind of strength. One afternoon, Rose and Emma sat together in the kitchen, talking over cups of coffee. It was one of those rare moments when the house felt calm, the chaos of daily life momentarily at bay. They hadn't had a conversation like this in a while, just the two of them, without distractions. "Mom," Emma began, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I've been thinking a lot about everything you've been going through. It's not easy, I know. But I can see how much you've changed over the last few months. You're different. And I mean that in a good way." Rose raised an eyebrow. "Different how?" "You're not as afraid to ask for help anymore. And I think that's made all the difference, not just for you, but for all of us. We've always looked up to you, you know. But now, I see you're letting us be there for you. You're letting us in." Rose took a deep breath, the words stirring a complex mix of emotions within her. She'd spent so long trying to keep things together, thinking that if she didn't, everything would fall apart. But Emma was right. By allowing herself to accept help, to show vulnerability, Rose had not only become more real with her family but had also found the emotional freedom to heal. "I guess I never realized how much I needed to change," Rose admitted. "I always thought that being strong meant doing everything on my own. But now I see that sometimes, real strength is letting go and letting others help." Emma smiled, reaching out to squeeze her mother's hand. "You've always been strong, Mom. But I think now, you're stronger than ever. You've shown us what it means to be vulnerable, and that takes so much courage." Rose was silent for a moment, reflecting on the transformation that had taken place inside her. It wasn't just about her health anymore, it was about how she had learned to let go of her old beliefs about independence and strength. She no longer had to carry the weight of everything herself. She had a family who loved her, and together, they could face whatever came next. Later that evening, as Rose prepared a simple dinner for her family, she found herself thinking about the bigger picture. Her health was still a concern, but the constant battle to regain control over every aspect of her life no longer felt necessary. She had learned that healing wasn't just about what happened physically, it was about emotional growth too. She was no longer the same woman who had silently fought her battles alone. She had changed, and that change had brought with it a new understanding of herself, her family, and the importance of connection. Liam, now more confident in his recovery, came into the kitchen, leaning on his crutches but smiling. "Hey, Mom. I was thinking about what you said the other day, about letting go of control. It made me realize something." Rose raised an eyebrow, curious. "What's that?" "I've been holding on too tightly to this idea that I can do everything by myself too. I guess I didn't want to be seen as weak, but I've been hurting my recovery more by not asking for help. I think I need to start accepting that I can't do it all on my own." Rose smiled warmly, her heart swelling with pride. "Liam, that's such a huge step. You're stronger than you know, and asking for help is one of the bravest things you can do." The exchange between her and Liam was another reminder of how much they had both grown. They had learned that strength wasn't about perfection, it was about vulnerability, trust, and the courage to face the unknown together. Both of them were still learning how to navigate their respective journeys, but they were no longer alone. That night, as they sat down for dinner, Rose felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. For the first time in a long while, she didn't feel like she had to fix everything. She didn't have to be perfect. All she needed to do was be present, to be there for the people she loved, and to accept that life's uncertainties were part of the process. The love and support of her family were more than enough to face whatever challenges the future held. The road to healing, both physical and emotional, was never easy, but Rose now understood that it wasn't about a destination. It was about the journey. And with her family by her side, she was ready to continue on that path, step by step, knowing that she no longer had to carry the weight alone. The sun had begun to set on a crisp autumn evening, casting a warm orange glow over Rose's backyard. As the trees swayed gently in the breeze, a feeling of peace settled over her. For the first time in months, Rose felt like things were beginning to stabilize. Liam's recovery was progressing well, and though the road was still long, she could see the light at the end of the tunnel. She had also noticed a shift in herself. A sense of balance she hadn't experienced in years. She was learning to accept both the highs and the lows without trying to control them. But life, as it often does, had another lesson in store for her. The phone rang as Rose was preparing a light dinner for herself and Liam. It was an unfamiliar number. Hesitant, she answered, wondering who it could be. "Hello, this is Rose," she said, trying to sound calm despite her growing curiosity. The voice on the other end was a little strained, but familiar. "Hi, Rose. It's Dr. Matthews. I'm calling with the results of your recent tests." Rose's heart skipped a beat. She had been trying not to dwell on her health, after all, things had been going well lately. She had been sticking to her medication schedule, eating right, and resting when necessary. But hearing from Dr. Matthews never failed to stir a wave of anxiety. "Of course, Dr. Matthews. What did you find?" There was a long pause. "Rose, I wish I could give you better news. The results show that your blood pressure levels have worsened over the past few months. We need to take immediate action." The words hit her like a ton of bricks. A knot formed in her stomach, and for a moment, she felt like the room had closed in around her. She had worked so hard to regain some semblance of normalcy, only to be reminded once again that her body wasn't cooperating. "Worsened?" Rose repeated, trying to steady her breath. "But I've been doing everything right. I've been following the plan." Dr. Matthews' voice softened, but his words were firm. "I know, Rose. But sometimes, despite our best efforts, our bodies don't respond the way we want them to. We'll need to adjust your treatment plan. I'd like you to come in for another consultation as soon as possible." Rose swallowed hard, trying to process what he was saying. Her mind raced, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't push away the fear creeping up inside her. This was the last thing she wanted to hear. "Okay, Dr. Matthews. I'll be there as soon as I can," she managed to say, her voice barely above a whisper. She hung up the phone slowly, staring blankly at the counter in front of her. Her mind was spinning with a mix of emotions, fear, frustration, and a deep sense of helplessness. After everything she had fought through, was it possible that her health would always be a battle? Was this something she would never escape? The door to the kitchen opened, and Liam stepped in, looking concerned as he noticed the expression on her face. "Mom. What's wrong?" Rose turned to him, blinking away the tears she hadn't realized had formed. She took a deep breath, trying to find the words to explain. "Liam, the doctor just called. My blood pressure has gotten worse. I need to go back to the clinic for more tests and adjustments." Liam's face softened, and he walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Mom, I know this is hard, but we've been through a lot, haven't we? This isn't the end of the road. You've come so far already. You're not alone in this." Rose closed her eyes for a moment, appreciating his words more than he could know. She had spent so much of her life carrying the burden of responsibility, of pretending she could handle everything. But now, with Liam's support, she realized that she didn't have to face this alone. "I don't know what to do anymore, Liam," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It feels like just when things start to get better, something else goes wrong." "I know, Mom. It's like we take one step forward, and then life pushes us 2 steps back," Liam said, his voice steady. "But that doesn't mean we stop moving. We keep going. You've taught me that." Rose looked at him, a small smile tugging at her lips. She hadn't realized how much her journey had influenced him. Despite his own challenges, he had learned the same lessons of resilience she had tried so hard to embody. "I guess we do keep going, don't we?" Rose said softly, wiping her eyes. "You're stronger than you think, Mom," Liam said. "And I'm here for you. We'll face this together, just like we always do." The weight of his words hit her deeply. They had both been through so much, and yet, here they were, still standing, still supporting each other. Maybe that was the point. Life might never be perfect, but together, they could handle whatever came their way. As Rose sat down to the dinner she had begun preparing, she felt a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead was uncertain, and the future was impossible to predict, but one thing was certain: she didn't have to face it alone. The next morning, Rose went to her appointment with Dr. Matthews, unsure of what the future held. She was ready for whatever came her way, knowing that, even when life tested her in ways she hadn't anticipated, she could face it with the strength of her family by her side. And as the days passed, Rose embraced the uncertainty with a new perspective. She didn't have all the answers, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel the need to control every aspect of her life. She just had to trust that, no matter what, she could weather the storms with love, support, and faith that things would eventually get better. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? It was a quiet morning when Rose found herself sitting in the waiting room of Dr. Matthews' office. Her mind kept drifting to the test results, wondering what adjustments would be needed, and how this new chapter would unfold. The fear that had crept into her life the night before hadn't completely left, but she had also felt a glimmer of hope in Liam's words, his unwavering belief that they could get through this together. She had held on to that thought as she waited, allowing it to settle her nerves. As she sat there, flipping through an old magazine, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She took it out and saw a text from Emma. "How's everything going, Mom? I'm thinking of you. Love you." A warm smile tugged at her lips as she quickly typed a reply. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Just here for my appointment. Thanks for checking in. Love you too." Emma had been a constant source of comfort for her throughout this journey. It had been years since Rose had allowed herself to lean on her daughter in such a way. She often found herself thinking about how much Emma had grown, how much her children had all taught her about love, strength, and vulnerability. When she first got sick, she had been so focused on her own survival that she hadn't fully realized the ways in which she had pushed her family away, trying to protect them from her struggles. Now, she had learned that their love and support were just as vital to her healing as the medications and treatments. Rose? Dr. Matthews' voice broke her thoughts, and she stood up quickly, smoothing the fabric of her blouse as she made her way into the examination room. The doctor greeted her with his usual calm demeanor, his eyes scanning the chart in his hands. "Hi, Dr. Matthews. Thanks for seeing me today." "Of course," he said, sitting across from her. "Let's talk about the results, shall we?" Rose nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Please. I've been waiting to hear what you think we need to do." Dr. Matthews adjusted his glasses before looking back at her. "Well, the tests show that while your blood pressure has worsened, it's still manageable with the right approach. The key here will be a multifaceted treatment plan, combining medication adjustments, physical activity, and a bit more focus on stress management." Rose let out a relieved breath. "So, it's not as bad as I thought." "No, not at all," he reassured her. "In fact, with some lifestyle changes and a bit more monitoring, we're hopeful that you'll see improvement." "Thank you," Rose whispered, her body relaxing as the weight of her worries began to lift. "I've been so scared, you know. After everything that's happened, I wasn't sure I could handle another setback." "You've handled everything that's come your way so far," Dr. Matthews replied gently. "And now we just need to fine-tune your approach. It's not about starting over, Rose. It's about adjusting, growing, and learning how to live with what's happening, not against it." Rose nodded, absorbing his words. "So, what's the next step?" "We'll adjust your medication. I want to start you on a different regimen, one that's a little more targeted. I'd also like you to increase your physical activity, nothing too strenuous, just regular walks and maybe a yoga class. And I can recommend a therapist for you to help manage stress more effectively. It's not just about the physical symptoms, managing your mental and emotional health will make a huge difference too." Rose felt a weight lifted from her shoulders. There was a plan, a way forward. For the first time in a long while, she felt hopeful. There was a future beyond the fear, beyond the illness. It would take work, yes, but she wasn't facing it alone. "I can do that," she said, her voice firm now. "I can make those changes." "I have no doubt you will, Rose," Dr. Matthews said with a smile. "You've come this far, and I'm confident you'll keep going." As she left the office, Rose felt an unfamiliar sense of relief. The road ahead wasn't going to be easy, but it was one she was now ready to walk. And for the first time in a while, she felt like she had control over something, her own healing. Not in the sense of perfection or complete autonomy, but in the sense of taking responsibility for what she could, and allowing herself to lean on others when needed. When Rose arrived home, she was greeted by Liam and Emma. They had been so patient with her during the past few weeks, letting her process her fears in her own time, but now, they were ready to move forward with her. "How did it go?" Emma asked, her eyes searching her mother's face. "It went well," Rose replied with a soft smile. "We've got a new plan, and I feel good about it. I'm going to be okay." Liam placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "We knew you would be. You're one tough cookie, Mom." Rose chuckled lightly, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. She had always prided herself on being strong, but she had never realized just how much strength she drew from those around her. It wasn't just about enduring, it was about growing together, learning from one another, and sharing the burden of life's challenges. "I think it's time to take it one day at a time," Rose said. "And I'm not going to try to do it all by myself anymore. I've learned that much." Liam and Emma both nodded, their expressions softening with understanding. They had all come so far, through so many trials, and now, they were ready to face whatever the future held. That evening, as they sat around the dinner table, Rose looked around at the faces of her family. They were laughing, sharing stories, and simply enjoying each other's company. For the first time in a long while, Rose felt a deep sense of gratitude for the ordinary moments, the ones she had once overlooked in her constant pursuit of control. She had learned that life wasn't just about the destination, it was about the journey. And that journey, with all its twists and turns, was one she would take with the people she loved by her side. The next few weeks were a blur of adjustments and new routines. Rose had always been a creature of habit, but her habits had always revolved around staying on top of things, work, family, and an unyielding pursuit of perfection. Now, it was about finding a new balance. Her life was no longer about the frantic race from one goal to the next, but about settling into a rhythm that honored both her health and her responsibilities. Liam and Emma had both been incredible during this transition. They made sure that Rose didn't feel like she was carrying the weight of everything on her shoulders. Liam, with his newfound maturity, had begun to help with household chores, even offering to do the grocery shopping when he could. Emma, always the organizer, had made sure Rose's medical appointments, exercise schedule, and stress relief practices were all written down on a large calendar. It was like a team effort, one where each member of the family was pulling their weight to help Rose heal. Despite the support, Rose knew that change wasn't easy. And some days were harder than others. "Morning, Mom," Liam called out from the kitchen one bright Saturday morning. He was already busy preparing breakfast. His face was still sleepy, but there was a spring in his step that made Rose smile. "Good morning," she replied, entering the kitchen with a cup of tea in hand. She took a deep breath, trying to center herself before she began the day's tasks. Liam looked over his shoulder and smiled, though his eyes were full of concern. "How's the blood pressure today? Did you take your meds?" Rose nodded as she sat down at the table. She appreciated his concern, but sometimes, the constant checking felt like a weight she hadn't anticipated. Yet, she understood why he did it. He wanted her to be okay, wanted her to be here for the long haul. It was just hard to adjust to the idea that, even at her age, she was still someone's responsibility. "I took them, don't worry," she said with a reassuring smile, taking a sip from her tea. "I'll be fine, just adjusting to the new routine. It's been a lot, but I'm getting the hang of it." Liam placed a plate of scrambled eggs in front of her. "Don't push yourself too hard, Mom. We've got time. It's not about rushing." The words hit her in a way she didn't expect. For so long, she had been pushing herself, racing against time and her own body. But now, Liam was right, there was no need to rush. There was only the present moment. "Thanks, sweetie," she said quietly. "I needed to hear that." After breakfast, Rose took a deep breath and began her first real step in her new routine. A short walk. The weather was cool but sunny, the kind of day that felt perfect for getting some fresh air without feeling weighed down by humidity or heat. Rose put on her sneakers and stepped out the door, feeling the crisp autumn air fill her lungs. She wasn't out for long, just enough to stretch her legs and breathe in the fresh air. As she walked around the block, she noticed the small things she had overlooked before, the vibrant colors of the trees, the sound of birds overhead, the smell of grass that had just been mowed. It was strange how she had never taken time for these things before. She had been too busy, too focused on goals that always seemed just out of reach. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to slow down. The pressure that had once been constant seemed a little less heavy. She walked past the park where families were laughing, kids playing, and for a moment, she realized how much she had missed the simple joys of life. As she returned home, she felt a small sense of accomplishment. It wasn't much, just a short walk, a simple morning routine, but it was a step forward. That afternoon, Rose attended a yoga class that Emma had recommended. It was a gentle class, one designed for people with chronic health conditions, and it was filled with people from all walks of life. Rose had never been one for yoga, she had always thought of it as something for people who needed to relax or unwind after a stressful day. But as the instructor guided them through deep breathing and gentle stretching, Rose found herself becoming more and more immersed in the experience. The movements were slow, deliberate, and designed to release tension in the body. The instructor's calm voice resonated with Rose, helping her to center her thoughts and focus on nothing but the present moment. For the first time in months, she wasn't worried about her blood pressure, or her next appointment, or her work. She was just there, fully present. After the class, as Rose stretched in the cool-down portion, she felt an unexpected sense of peace. It was the kind of peace she hadn't realized she was missing. She had been so focused on controlling every part of her life that she hadn't left any space for true relaxation. When the class ended, the instructor came over to her with a gentle smile. "You did really well today," she said. "How do you feel?" Rose took a moment to reflect, then gave the instructor a soft smile. "Surprisingly good," she admitted. "I didn't expect to enjoy it, but it felt different. I think I needed this." "I'm glad to hear that," the instructor said warmly. "Yoga has a way of teaching us to listen to our bodies, rather than forcing them. It's a beautiful practice, and it's all about progress, not perfection." Rose nodded, absorbing her words. It was a reminder that healing, whether physical, emotional, or mental, wasn't about being perfect. It was about progress. And as long as she continued moving forward, one step at a time, she was doing just fine. Later that evening, Rose sat at the kitchen table with Liam and Emma, sharing stories from their respective days. Liam had spent the afternoon working on a school project, while Emma had been running errands around town. It was the kind of evening that felt normal and comforting, nothing extraordinary, just life unfolding as it should. As they sat together, Rose reflected on the past few weeks. She had come a long way since that phone call from Dr. Matthews, but there was still work to do. She wasn't cured, no one ever really was. But she was learning to live with her condition, not as a victim, but as a participant in her own healing. She smiled to herself as she watched Liam and Emma talk, realizing that she didn't need to have everything figured out. The path forward wasn't about being in control of every detail, it was about trusting herself, trusting the process, and trusting the people who had always been there for her. "Thanks for being here," Rose said softly, her voice full of gratitude. "You both make this journey so much easier." Liam smiled back. "We're family. We're in this together." And for the first time in a long time, Rose believed him. In the weeks following her new routine, Rose had made strides toward improving her health, but she was beginning to realize that change was never as simple as following a checklist. The small adjustments she had made to her daily life, taking her medication regularly, exercising more, attending yoga classes, had begun to feel more like obligations than the empowering acts of self-care she had hoped for. At first, she had been energized by the idea of healing, but now, each day seemed like a battle to maintain this fragile balance she was building. It wasn't that the changes weren't working. Her blood pressure had stabilized somewhat, and her energy levels had improved. However, the emotional toll of it all was beginning to wear on her. The constant monitoring of her health, the reminder that she was no longer invincible, was taking its toll. Sometimes, it felt like she was carrying around a heavy weight she could never quite put down. That morning, as Rose sat at the breakfast table, she found herself staring at the bottle of medication on the counter. It had become a constant fixture in her life, each day began with it, and each day ended with it. The thought of taking the pills felt mundane, like a necessary chore rather than something that would lead to true wellness. "Mom. You okay?" Liam's voice broke her thoughts. He had just entered the kitchen, his backpack slung over one shoulder as he prepared to head off to school. Rose looked up at him, offering a smile she didn't quite feel. "Yeah, just thinking," she said, trying to sound more composed than she actually felt. Liam paused, his eyes narrowing with concern. "You sure? You've been kind of distant lately. Is everything going all right with your routine?" Rose sighed, leaning back in her chair. She knew he was right. The energy she had had in the beginning had slowly started to fade. "It's just. I don't know. It feels like I'm constantly thinking about my health, my blood pressure, my medication. It's exhausting, and sometimes I wonder if this is all I'm going to be from now on, someone with high blood pressure and a long list of things to worry about. Liam sat down across from her, his expression softening. I get it, Mom. It's hard. But you're doing it. You're taking care of yourself, and that's huge. Rose's shoulders slumped as she ran a hand through her hair. I just feel like I'm not getting anywhere. I'm stuck in this cycle of doing what I'm supposed to do, but I don't feel any different. I thought once I started this new routine, I'd feel better, like it would make everything easier. But I feel worn out. Liam reached across the table and placed a hand over hers. I know it's tough. But you've made so much progress already. You've come a long way since we first found out about your blood pressure. And that's something to be proud of, even if it doesn't feel like it right now. Rose appreciated his words, but the weight of her exhaustion made it hard to truly feel the pride she knew she should. It was easier said than done to feel accomplished when it seemed like every day was another battle to keep moving forward. I don't know, she muttered, withdrawing her hand from his. It just feels like I'm going through the motions. I wish I could feel. I don't know, better. Like I was truly healing, not just managing symptoms. Liam looked at her thoughtfully. You're still healing. It's just, not always going to feel like a straight line, you know. Healing's messy. Some days you're going to feel like you're on top of the world, and others, it's going to feel like you're sinking. But it doesn't mean you're not making progress. Rose looked at him, surprised by how wise he sounded. Sometimes, she forgot that he had his own struggles, even though they were so different from hers. At times like this, though, she saw how much he had grown, and how much he had learned about patience and understanding. You're right, she said, finally offering a small smile. I just wish it was easier. Liam shrugged. Life's not easy, Mom. But you're tougher than you give yourself credit for. You've always been. This is just another thing that makes you stronger. She nodded, feeling a flicker of warmth spread through her. Liam was right. Life wasn't easy, and maybe this chapter wasn't going to be smooth sailing. But that didn't mean she was weak or failing. It just meant that healing was an ongoing process, full of ups and downs. That afternoon, Rose met with her support group, a small circle of people who were dealing with similar health challenges. For the first time in weeks, she felt a sense of solidarity. Everyone in the group was struggling in their own way, but they had all found a common thread in their shared experiences. It was a reminder that she wasn't alone, that there were others who understood exactly what she was going through. As they sat in a circle, each person sharing their latest challenges and victories, Rose felt a sense of connection she hadn't realized she had been missing. She was used to being the one who provided support to others, but here, she was on the receiving end. It was humbling, but it was also comforting. I'm just so tired, one woman said, her voice thick with emotion. I've been following my doctor's advice, doing everything I'm supposed to do, and yet I still don't feel better. I'm so tired of the constant monitoring, the daily routine. It's like my life has been reduced to pills and doctor's appointments. Rose nodded, her heart aching in understanding. She could relate to every word. I know what you mean. Some days, it just feels like, is this all there is? Will I ever feel like myself again? Another person in the group, a man named Paul, spoke up. You will, he said, his voice steady. It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to happen overnight. But there are good days ahead. There will be days when you can breathe easier, laugh harder, and feel more like yourself. But you have to let go of the idea that everything will be perfect again. It's okay to have bad days. It's okay to feel frustrated. Rose felt a surge of gratitude for Paul's words. It was the reminder she needed, the reminder that the road ahead wasn't about achieving perfection. It was about progress, about learning to live with what had happened, and finding the strength to keep moving forward. As the meeting came to a close, Rose realized something important. The struggle wasn't over, and there were days when she would feel defeated. But she didn't have to face those days alone. She had her family, her friends, and her support group. And most importantly, she had the resilience to keep going, even when the road ahead seemed unclear. That night, as she prepared for bed, Rose looked at the medication bottle on the counter once more. It wasn't a symbol of defeat, it was a symbol of care. Of self-love. Of resilience. And for the first time in weeks, she felt a glimmer of peace with it. Her journey wasn't about perfection. It was about embracing the struggle, and trusting that she was doing everything she could, one day at a time. The next few days felt like a turning point. Rose had made peace with the idea that healing wasn't going to be a smooth journey. But that didn't make the days any less frustrating. There were still moments of exhaustion, confusion, and doubt. Yet, something inside her had begun to shift. She started realizing that instead of fighting the process, maybe she needed to embrace it, to accept that her life had changed, but that didn't mean it had to stop. One Wednesday morning, as Rose was preparing her breakfast, she received a call from Dr. Matthews. At first, she hesitated. The last few calls had been routine check-ins, updates on her blood pressure medication, and reminders to keep up with her lifestyle changes. But today, the tone in Dr. Matthews' voice was different. There was a sense of urgency in it. "Rose, I need to talk to you about something. Can you come in for a visit today?" the doctor said, her voice serious but calm. Rose's heart skipped a beat. "Is something wrong?" "I don't want to alarm you," Dr. Matthews replied, "but we need to discuss some test results. It's best if we talk about it face to face." Rose felt a pang of fear. She glanced over at Liam, who was sitting at the kitchen table, scrolling through his phone, oblivious to her growing unease. She didn't want to worry him, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. "Okay," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'll be there in an hour." After hanging up, Rose found herself in a whirlwind of thoughts. What could the results mean? Had something changed? Or was it just another step in the long process of managing her condition? She took a deep breath, trying to ground herself. She had come so far already, and she wouldn't let fear pull her backward now. When Rose arrived at Dr. Matthews' office, she was ushered in immediately. There was no time wasted in small talk, and the weight of the conversation to come was heavy in the air. Dr. Matthews was already seated, holding a clipboard with her test results. "Rose," Dr. Matthews said as she motioned for her to sit down. "I've been reviewing your recent tests and, while we've seen some positive changes in your health, there's one thing that needs our attention." Rose's stomach tightened. "What is it?" The doctor took a deep breath. "Your blood pressure has stabilized to a certain extent, but there are signs of underlying issues, potential complications that will need to monitor more closely. It's possible that you've been experiencing some side effects from the medication, and we may need to adjust your treatment plan." Rose blinked in surprise. "Side effects? I thought I was doing everything right." "You are," Dr. Matthews reassured her. "But it's a fine balance when it comes to blood pressure management. Sometimes, medications can cause other issues, and it's important to monitor everything in tandem. I want to make sure that you're feeling as good as possible, and that means we need to tweak things a bit." Rose nodded slowly, trying to absorb everything. The idea that her progress might come with unforeseen complications was unsettling. She had worked so hard to get things under control, to take responsibility for her health, but now it felt like she was back at square one. "So, what happens now?" she asked, her voice strained but steady. "We'll start by adjusting your medication," Dr. Matthews explained. "I'm also going to have you undergo some more tests, just to rule out any other possible concerns. This isn't uncommon, but we need to be proactive. You're doing well, but I want to make sure we're on the right track." Rose sat in silence for a moment, her mind racing. She had been so focused on sticking to her routine and making everything right that the idea of her health still being in flux unsettled her. She thought she had been making progress, but maybe she was just learning to adapt to a new normal, one that was full of uncertainty. "I understand," Rose said finally, her voice soft. "I'll do whatever needs to be done." Dr. Matthews smiled warmly. "I know you will. We'll get this sorted. You're not alone in this, Rose." Later that evening, Rose sat on the porch, sipping tea, her mind spinning. Liam had been home when she returned from the doctor's office, and they'd had a brief conversation about the appointment. She had tried to keep the details minimal, not wanting to worry him more than necessary. But deep down, she knew the path ahead wasn't as clear as it once seemed. "Everything okay, Mom?" Liam had asked, his voice tentative. He could tell something was off. Rose had smiled at him, though the smile didn't quite reach her eyes. "Yeah, just some more adjustments to make. But we'll figure it out." Now, sitting in the quiet of the evening, she realized how much she had been keeping to herself. Even with the support of her family, even with the encouragement from her son, there were still moments when the weight of it all felt too much to carry alone. Rose had always been the strong one, the one who made things happen, who took care of everyone else. But now, it felt like she was being forced to confront her own vulnerabilities, and she wasn't sure she was ready for that. She reached for her phone and texted Emma, "I'm feeling a bit overwhelmed. Can we talk soon?" Emma's reply came quickly, "Of course. Let's meet for coffee tomorrow morning. You don't have to go through this alone." Rose felt a wave of relief wash over her. Even though she had been trying to handle everything herself, it was moments like this, moments when her friends and family reached out, that reminded her she didn't have to shoulder it all. The next morning, Rose and Emma met at their favorite local cafe. As soon as they sat down with their coffees, Rose didn't hold back. She recounted her visit with Dr. Matthews, the adjustments to her medication, and the uncertainty that seemed to hang over her health. "I feel like I've done everything right," Rose said, frustration seeping into her voice. "I've changed my habits, I've stuck to my routine, and yet I still feel like things are out of my control." Emma listened quietly, nodding in understanding. "It's exhausting, isn't it?" she said softly. "All the work, all the effort, and it feels like there's always something more to worry about." Rose looked down at her coffee cup, swirling the liquid absently. "It's not just the medication. It's like I'm constantly battling something, even when I think I'm doing everything right." "I think that's part of it," Emma replied thoughtfully. "We can't always control everything, no matter how hard we try. Sometimes, the best thing we can do is trust the process, even when it feels uncertain." Rose looked up at Emma, searching her friend's face for any sign of the advice she was hoping for. "But how do you trust the process when you don't even know what's coming next?" Emma smiled gently. "You trust it by taking it one step at a time. You don't have to have it all figured out right now. The important thing is that you're doing your best, and that's enough. And when you feel like you're overwhelmed, you lean on the people who care about you." For the first time in a long while, Rose felt a lightness she hadn't realized she was missing. Maybe Emma was right. Maybe the key wasn't in controlling everything but in surrendering to the uncertainty and trusting that, with the right support, she would find her way through. The days following Rose's visit to Dr. Matthews were filled with a sense of mixed emotions. Her medication adjustments had been made, and she had done her best to remain optimistic. But despite her efforts, there was still a part of her that couldn't shake the feeling of being stuck in a cycle of waiting, for results, for answers, for the right combination of treatments that would make everything better. Rose couldn't help but reflect on the conversations she'd had with Emma, her son, and even with Dr. Matthews. They all spoke about strength, how important it was to be resilient, to keep moving forward. But Rose was starting to question what strength really meant. Was it about pushing through the discomfort? Was it about always being fine, or appearing as though she had it all together? Or was true strength found in the ability to admit when things weren't fine, when she was struggling, and when she needed help? It was a question that lingered with her, making her reflect deeper than she had before. She realized that part of her health journey, one she had been neglecting, was to embrace her vulnerability. To stop pretending that she had it all under control when, in fact, she didn't. As she went through her routine in the days that followed, Rose began to pay more attention to how often she pushed her feelings aside in favor of appearing strong. She had always been the pillar for others. She had taken pride in being the one who kept things together, the one who could always be counted on. But lately, that role felt like a burden. It was exhausting to maintain that image, and it was starting to feel like the cracks in her facade were beginning to show. One evening, after another long day of managing her symptoms and sticking to her schedule, Rose collapsed onto the couch in exhaustion. Liam was in his room, and the house was quiet. For the first time in a long time, Rose allowed herself to fully feel the weight of everything. She was scared. Scared of the future. Scared of what her health might look like a year from now, 5 years from now. The thought of her health deteriorating, or of her body failing her, felt like a constant, looming threat. It was in that moment that she realized, she was terrified of being weak. She had always been the strong one. Her entire identity had been wrapped up in her ability to face challenges head-on and come out on top. But now, she wasn't sure what it meant to be strong anymore. It was a complicated feeling. Vulnerability wasn't something Rose had ever embraced. It made her feel exposed, as though she were letting the world see her at her most fragile. But as she sat there, wrapped in the silence of the evening, she began to recognize that maybe, just maybe, vulnerability was where real strength came from. Admitting she was struggling didn't make her weak. In fact, it made her human. It made her real. And there was nothing weak about that. The following day, Rose reached out to her support group. The conversation she had had with Emma the week before had planted a seed in her mind, a seed that began to grow when she realized she didn't have to carry everything alone. So, she sent a text, "Hey, would any of you want to meet up soon? I've been feeling a little overwhelmed lately and could really use a chat." The responses were immediate. "I'm in," came from Paul. "Count me in," Emma replied. Even Mary, who was usually quiet in group chats, sent a message, "I'd love that. We're all in this together." The meetup was set for that weekend. Rose felt a bit lighter just knowing she wouldn't have to go through it all on her own. And as the days passed, she found herself slowly coming to terms with the idea of being vulnerable. She wasn't sure what the group would say. But for the first time in a while, Rose was ready to open up. Saturday arrived, and Rose found herself walking into the familiar coffee shop where they usually met. The warm, cozy atmosphere felt like a hug, a place where she could let go and be herself without judgment. She spotted her group right away, sitting at their usual table near the window. Paul was there, tapping away on his phone, while Emma and Mary were chatting about their week. When they saw Rose, they greeted her with smiles, and she felt a rush of gratitude for their presence. "Rose!" Emma called out. "So glad you could make it." Paul stood up and gave her a gentle hug. "How's it going, Rose? You holding up?" Rose smiled faintly, her heart warming from their kindness. "I'm hanging in there. But honestly, I've been struggling a bit lately. I think I've been holding it all in and pretending I've got it all figured out, but I don't. I'm scared sometimes. I don't know if I can keep doing this. I don't want to let anyone down." The group sat in stunned silence for a moment. Rose hadn't expected this outpouring of honesty from herself. But the words had come out before she could stop them, and now they hung in the air between them, raw and vulnerable. Finally, it was Emma who spoke. "Rose," she said gently, "you don't have to do this alone. And you don't have to be perfect. In fact, none of us do. We're all allowed to feel scared. We're allowed to struggle. What matters is that we have each other." Paul nodded in agreement. "You don't need to carry this burden alone. We've all been there. Hell, I'm still there sometimes. Mary, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "You're stronger than you think. And strength isn't about always holding it together. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is admit that you need help. And we're here to give it." Rose felt her heart swell. The weight of the last few months, the uncertainty, the fear, felt just a little lighter now. There was something so powerful about hearing those words. That it was okay to not be okay, and that she didn't have to be the strong one all the time. The conversation flowed after that, with everyone sharing their own fears, their own vulnerabilities. Rose realized that, in her moment of weakness, she had actually found strength. Not the kind of strength that came from keeping everything together, but the kind that came from being honest with herself, and with the people who cared about her. As the afternoon wore on and the group continued to talk, Rose felt something shifting inside her. She wasn't sure how to describe it, but for the first time in a while, she felt like she wasn't alone in her struggle. And that, in itself, was a kind of peace. When she left the coffee shop later that day, she walked with a little more confidence. Her health journey was still uncertain, but now, she knew that being vulnerable wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a sign of courage. And with the support of her friends, and the willingness to open up, she could face whatever came next. It had been a week since Rose had met with her support group, and something inside her had begun to change. The conversations, the vulnerability, and the emotional openness had left a deep mark on her. For the first time in months, she was allowing herself to simply be. She wasn't forcing herself to be perfect, or to meet everyone else's expectations. Instead, she was learning to embrace her journey, as messy and unpredictable as it was. That week, Rose took small steps. She focused on the little things, making time for herself, taking walks in the neighborhood, cooking meals that nourished her body, and even trying her hand at journaling. Writing her thoughts down on paper had always helped her make sense of her feelings, but she had forgotten how much peace it could bring her. As Rose sat at her kitchen table one morning, sipping her coffee and flipping through her journal, she was struck by a new thought. "I've been so focused on fixing everything that I've forgotten to live," she whispered to herself. The weight of the realization hit her, but it wasn't overwhelming. It was a simple truth: she had been so consumed by her diagnosis, her medication, her daily routines, that she hadn't left much room for joy. Her life had been reduced to checklists and appointments, with little time for the things that once made her heart light. Rose closed her journal and set it aside, making a decision in that moment. It was time to reconnect with the things that brought her happiness, no matter how small. She didn't want to wait until everything was perfect to live her life. She couldn't keep putting off the things she loved because of her health. There had to be balance. She was allowed to enjoy her life, even while working through the challenges. That afternoon, Rose took a walk to the local park. It was a crisp fall day, the kind that invited people to step outside and enjoy the simple beauty of nature. As she walked along the path, the sound of leaves crunching beneath her feet and the scent of fresh air filled her senses. For the first time in what felt like forever, she took a deep breath and let go. She didn't think about her blood pressure, or her doctor's appointments, or the upcoming tests. She let herself be present in that moment. It felt liberating. A few days later, Rose received another call from Dr. Matthews. The results of her latest tests were in, and this time, they were more positive. The new medication adjustments had begun to show promise. Her blood pressure was stabilizing, and while there were still fluctuations, they were more manageable. Rose could feel the difference. There was a lightness to her body that hadn't been there in weeks. "I'm feeling a little better," Rose admitted during the call. "But I also feel like I'm just beginning to understand how to live with all this." Dr. Matthews chuckled softly. "It's a journey, Rose. And it's okay to feel uncertain sometimes. But it sounds like you're making progress, not just with your health, but with your mindset too. And that's a huge part of healing." Rose smiled. "I think I'm finally realizing that healing isn't just about getting my blood pressure under control. It's about accepting the things I can't change and finding peace with them. That's exactly right, Dr. Matthews said, her voice warm with approval. And remember, it's okay to take your time. There's no need to rush through this process. Take it one day at a time. That evening, after dinner with Liam, Rose found herself feeling surprisingly content. Liam had grown used to seeing his mother more relaxed. Her evenings were no longer spent frantically planning for the next doctor's visit or stressing over every little detail. Instead, they spent time together, talking about their days or simply watching TV. "Mom, you seem different," Liam remarked one evening as they were watching a movie. "It's like you're more calm." "I can't really explain it, but I can tell." Rose turned to him with a soft smile. "I think I've just been learning how to stop worrying so much. I've realized that life's not going to be perfect, and that's okay." Liam raised an eyebrow. "Are you sure? You're not really the let things be type." She laughed. "I wasn't. But I'm getting there." It was a big step for Rose, letting go of the need to control every aspect of her life. The perfectionist in her had always tried to keep everything neatly in place. But now, she was learning that life didn't always fit into tidy boxes, and that was perfectly fine. In fact, it was necessary for her well-being. Over the next few weeks, Rose continued to focus on her health, but she also began to rediscover her passions. One afternoon, she dusted off her old art supplies, watercolors, brushes, and sketch pads. She used to love painting, but in recent years, it had become something she simply didn't have time for. Now, she made space for it again. As the first strokes of color filled the canvas, Rose felt a wave of nostalgia. She had forgotten how much she loved this. There was something therapeutic about letting her creativity flow, a meditative quality to it that allowed her to forget about her worries, even if just for a little while. It was a simple joy, but it was enough to remind her that life still had beauty, even in the midst of challenges. One evening, Liam walked by her studio nook and stopped to watch her paint. He didn't say anything at first, just observed quietly, and Rose didn't mind. The sound of the brush against the canvas was soothing, and for once, she wasn't rushing to finish something. She was simply being, enjoying the process. Finally, Liam spoke up. "I didn't know you painted anymore." "I didn't either," Rose replied, smiling as she added a few more strokes. "But I'm rediscovering some things about myself. Things I'd forgotten." Liam nodded, as if understanding more than words could explain. "I think it's really cool. I like seeing you happy, Mom." Rose's heart swelled with pride. Despite all the challenges she had faced, she was still able to find moments of happiness and connection. And that was more than enough. In the weeks that followed, Rose continued to balance her health with the things that brought her joy. She kept up with her doctor's appointments, adhered to her medication plan, and worked on her mental and emotional well-being. But she also allowed herself to live. She painted, she spent time with her son, she took long walks, and she reconnected with friends. She was finding a new kind of strength, one that wasn't about being invincible, but about being present, open, and accepting. And that, Rose realized, was the true road to rediscovery. Rose sat in her living room on a quiet Sunday morning, the soft hum of the coffee machine filling the space as she watched the first rays of sunlight stretch across the floor. It was the kind of morning that invited reflection, a peaceful start to what she had promised herself would be a day for rest. After weeks of focusing on her health and gradually reintroducing herself to the things she loved, Rose was starting to feel a sense of balance that she hadn't thought was possible. But there was still something missing, something she hadn't quite figured out yet. Her thoughts drifted back to the conversation she'd had with Dr. Matthews a few weeks ago. Healing is a journey, the doctor had said, and for some reason, those words had stuck with her. Rose had spent so much time feeling like her journey was just about physical recovery, about stabilizing her blood pressure and getting her body back on track. But lately, she had begun to realize that the emotional side of her health was just as important. It wasn't just about surviving the diagnosis anymore. It was about truly living with it. Accepting that, while there were certain things she couldn't control, there were others she could still impact. It was a shift in perspective, a shift from seeing herself as a patient who was constantly battling an illness, to seeing herself as a person who was still capable of experiencing life to the fullest, no matter the challenges. That afternoon, Rose decided to visit Emma. It had been a while since they'd had a proper heart-to-heart, and Rose found herself longing for the comfort of her friend's presence. Emma had been a steady source of support since Rose's diagnosis, always there with a listening ear and a compassionate word. There was a wisdom in Emma's voice that Rose had come to rely on, even when the weight of her own struggles made it difficult to ask for help. When she arrived at Emma's house, she was greeted with a warm smile and a tight hug. Emma led her inside, and the two of them settled into the cozy living room with cups of tea. "How have you been, Rose?" Emma asked, her eyes searching her face with genuine concern. Rose took a deep breath, appreciating the safe space Emma provided. "I'm doing better, I think. I've been feeling more at peace lately. I'm learning to accept that things might not be perfect, but that doesn't mean I can't find happiness in the imperfections." Emma smiled, her eyes lighting up with pride. "That's really beautiful, Rose. You've been through so much, and I think you're starting to understand something very important, that it's okay to not have everything figured out all the time." Rose nodded slowly. "I've spent so much of my life trying to control everything, my health, my future, even my emotions. But I'm starting to realize that sometimes, it's the things I can't control that teach me the most." Emma's expression softened. "You're absolutely right. Life isn't about controlling everything. It's about learning to navigate the unknown, to find meaning even when things don't go as planned. I think you're finally giving yourself the permission to live instead of just survive." Rose felt a weight lift off her chest. "I think I've been so focused on my health, on managing my blood pressure, that I forgot about living. It's like I've been waiting for a perfect moment to enjoy my life, but I don't want to wait anymore." Over the next few weeks, Rose continued to implement this new mindset into her daily routine. She spent more time with Liam, taking him to his favorite spots in town, whether it was the ice cream shop or the nature trails where they would hike together. They started making it a weekly tradition to explore new places, making memories along the way. And Rose? She began to find joy in the little moments. She allowed herself to be present with her son, not constantly thinking about her health or what might happen in the future. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid to embrace the spontaneity of life, even when it was uncertain. One evening, as she sat across from Liam at the dinner table, Rose felt a profound sense of gratitude. They were eating simple spaghetti, the kind of meal that didn't need to be perfect to be enjoyed. Liam was talking animatedly about his day at school, recounting a funny story about his teacher, while Rose listened, completely absorbed in the moment. "Mom." Liam's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up at him. "I'm really glad things are getting better. I know it's been tough, but you seem happier now." Rose smiled softly. "I am, sweetie. I think I've finally realized that I don't need to wait for everything to be perfect to enjoy my life. I'm learning to embrace the messiness of it all." Liam nodded, his eyes wide with understanding. "I think you're right. Life's not always easy, but we can still make the best of it." Rose's heart swelled with pride. Her son had always been wise beyond his years, and hearing him echo the lessons she was learning gave her a deep sense of peace. She was still a work in progress, but in that moment, she knew she was on the right path. The following weekend, Rose and Liam planned a trip to the beach. It was a spontaneous decision, but one that felt right. The weather was perfect, and the idea of spending the day by the ocean seemed like exactly what they both needed. As they arrived at the beach, Rose felt a sense of freedom wash over her. The salty breeze tousled her hair, and the sound of the waves crashing against the shore was a constant, soothing rhythm. She and Liam spent hours walking along the shoreline, collecting seashells and laughing as the waves splashed at their feet. It was a day that reminded Rose of the beauty in the world around her, a beauty that didn't have to be perfect, but was nonetheless worth cherishing. Later that evening, as they sat on a blanket watching the sunset, Rose felt a deep sense of peace. The uncertainty of her health still lingered in the background, but it no longer held the same power over her. She had learned to let go of the need for control and had found a new sense of freedom in embracing the unpredictable nature of life. Liam turned to her, his face illuminated by the fading light. "This was the best day ever, Mom." "Thank you." Rose smiled, her heart full. "I'm glad you had fun, Liam. And thank you for reminding me that it's the moments like this that matter the most." As they watched the sun dip below the horizon, Rose realized that the journey she had been on, both physically and emotionally, wasn't just about finding the right answers. It was about accepting the unknown, being present in the moment, and learning to live in the midst of it all. She had come a long way, but there was still more to discover, about herself, about her health, and about the life that was waiting for her. And for the first time in a long time, she was ready to embrace whatever came next. It had been several weeks since Rose had embraced her new mindset, and for the most part, life felt smoother than it had in months. She continued her medication, made time for self-care, and reveled in the simple pleasures of spending time with Liam. Her health was stabilizing, and for the first time, she felt like she was in control of more than just her physical health. She was nurturing her mental well-being, too. However, as with any journey, life had a way of throwing curveballs. One Friday afternoon, Rose received an unexpected call from Dr. Matthews. The tone in the doctor's voice was more serious than usual, which immediately put Rose on edge. "Rose," Dr. Matthews began, "I need to talk to you about your recent test results. There's been a slight change in your blood pressure readings over the past few days. We're seeing a bit of a spike, and I'd like to have you come in for a follow-up visit next week." Rose felt a wave of concern wash over her, despite all the progress she had made. "Is it serious?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "It's not an emergency," Dr. Matthews reassured her. "But it's something we need to monitor closely. We might need to adjust your treatment plan again, but we'll know more once we have a clearer picture." "Okay," Rose said, her mind already racing. "I'll make the appointment for next week." As she hung up the phone, she couldn't help but feel a sense of dread settle in her chest. After all the effort she'd put into getting her life back on track, could this be a setback? Could it be that she wasn't truly as stable as she'd hoped? Liam walked into the room just then, sensing the shift in the air. "What's wrong, Mom?" Rose took a deep breath, trying to put on a brave face. "I just need to go to the doctor next week for a follow-up. It's nothing major, but we need to keep an eye on my blood pressure." Liam frowned, his concern evident. "But you've been doing so much better. I thought everything was okay." "I thought so, too," Rose said, sitting down on the couch. "But sometimes, these things can change. I guess I'll just have to wait and see what happens." Liam hesitated for a moment before sitting beside her. "It'll be okay, Mom. You've handled everything so well. I know you can handle this, too." Rose smiled at him, her heart swelling with love and pride. "Thanks, sweetie. You're right. I've handled a lot already. And this is just another bump in the road. We'll get through it." Over the next few days, Rose found herself increasingly distracted. She didn't want to dwell on the uncertainty of the situation, but it was hard to ignore the nagging worry that kept resurfacing. Every time she took her blood pressure at home, she couldn't help but notice the small fluctuations. Nothing drastic, but enough to unsettle her. By the time her appointment with Dr. Matthews arrived, Rose was on edge. She had managed to keep her anxiety in check in front of Liam, but now that she was alone in the waiting room, it was harder to pretend everything was fine. "Rose, it's good to see you," Dr. Matthews said, offering a reassuring smile as she entered the exam room. "Let's take a look at your readings and go over the plan." Rose nodded, forcing herself to relax as Dr. Matthews checked her vitals and reviewed her test results. The good news, the doctor began, is that the overall trend is still better than where you were a few months ago. But there's definitely a fluctuation that we need to monitor. I think it might be due to some stress or lifestyle factors. Stress is a major contributor to blood pressure changes, and you've been through a lot lately. Rose nodded, feeling a mix of relief and frustration. I guess I've been so focused on my health that I haven't been as mindful of other things. I've been working hard, but I think I might have been overdoing it. It's very common, Dr. Matthews said. But we'll adjust your medication again and give you some strategies for managing stress. I know it's easier said than done, but you've made incredible progress so far. I believe you can make these adjustments too. That evening, Rose sat down with Liam over dinner, trying to process the information from her doctor's visit. She wasn't sure how to explain it to him, or if she even needed to. She didn't want him to worry, but she also didn't want to hide the truth from him. Liam, Rose began, her voice calm but steady. The doctor thinks I might be a little stressed, and that's been affecting my blood pressure. So, I'm going to work on managing my stress more. I'll keep taking my medication, and we'll see how things go. Liam listened intently, nodding as he absorbed the information. I get it, Mom. But you're doing so much better already. You're stronger than you think. Rose smiled at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. Thanks, sweetie. You're right. And we'll face this together. It's just another challenge to work through. The next few weeks were focused on managing her stress levels, something that didn't come easily to Rose. She had always been someone who thrived on control and accomplishment, and letting go of some of that control was harder than she expected. But she made small changes, incorporating mindfulness exercises into her daily routine, practicing deep breathing when she felt anxious, and allowing herself moments of rest without guilt. Liam noticed the changes, too. She spent more time with him on the weekends, doing things that weren't about checking boxes or achieving goals. They spent afternoons playing board games, cooking together, and simply enjoying each other's company. It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and it was exactly what Rose needed. One afternoon, as they sat together on the couch, Liam turned to her. You know, Mom, you've been a lot more relaxed lately. I think it's good for both of us. Rose smiled, feeling a warm sense of pride. I think you're right. I'm learning to be a little more gentle with myself. By the time Rose's next checkup arrived, she was cautiously optimistic. She had been taking her doctor's advice to heart, and she was beginning to feel more balanced, despite the lingering uncertainty. The adjustments to her medication had helped, and while there were still ups and downs, her blood pressure was stabilizing. Dr. Matthews was pleased with the progress. You're doing great, Rose. It's clear that you've made real changes, and I can see the improvement. Keep taking care of yourself, and we'll continue monitoring things. You've come a long way. Rose left the doctor's office feeling a renewed sense of determination. The road ahead wouldn't always be easy, but it was her road to walk. And she was no longer walking it alone. Rose had learned many things on her journey, but patience was perhaps the hardest lesson of all. Over the past few weeks, things had been looking up. Her blood pressure had stabilized, and her stress management techniques were paying off. She felt more balanced, more in control, but the truth was, she was still learning to trust the process. It wasn't just about taking her medication, making healthier choices, or following her doctor's advice. It was about understanding that some things just took time. It was early one morning when Rose felt the weight of that truth again. As usual, she woke up before Liam, taking a few quiet moments for herself. The morning sun peeked through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the room. Rose poured herself a cup of coffee, her mind still a bit foggy from sleep. She felt good, but there was a lingering thought in the back of her mind, what if I'm just not doing enough? The question caught her off guard. It was familiar, something she had struggled with before, when she was pushing herself too hard, when she felt like she wasn't achieving enough or making progress fast enough. But she knew, deep down, that this was a different situation. Her healing was happening at its own pace. There wasn't a shortcut. And while she could continue to make small changes and improve, there was no immediate, quick fix to her health. Liam walked into the kitchen just then, his messy hair falling over his eyes as he rubbed them sleepily. "Morning, Mom," he yawned, smiling at her. "Good morning, Liam," she said, offering him a warm smile. "How did you sleep?" "Okay, I guess. I was dreaming about our trip to the beach last week," he said, sitting down at the table. "I really liked that day." Rose's heart softened at the memory. "I'm glad. I think I needed that day too." "Yeah," Liam said, grinning. "It was fun. Let's do it again sometime." Rose nodded. "We will, buddy. I promise." The weeks continued to pass, and Rose kept putting one foot in front of the other. She stuck to her routines, worked on reducing stress, and spent time doing the things that made her feel grounded. She was becoming more and more aware of how interconnected everything was, her mind, her body, her relationships. It wasn't enough to just focus on her physical health, she had to nurture every part of herself. But just as she felt like she was finding a rhythm, life presented another reminder: things were always changing, and sometimes, no matter how hard we try, we couldn't control the pace. One afternoon, Rose was on a walk with Liam in the park, enjoying the fresh air and the sound of the wind rustling through the trees. They stopped by the playground, where Liam climbed on the jungle gym while Rose sat on a nearby bench, watching him with affection. "Hey, Mom. Look at this," Liam called, hanging upside down from a bar. "I can do it." Rose chuckled, her heart swelling with pride. Her son had always been so adventurous, so determined. He reminded her so much of herself when she was younger. As she sat there, lost in thought, she noticed a small group of elderly women walking slowly along the path, some using canes for support. They were chatting and laughing, clearly enjoying each other's company. Rose smiled as she watched them, feeling a sense of connection to them, even though they were strangers. Then, without warning, one of the women stumbled. Her cane slipped out from under her, and she fell hard onto the pavement. Rose's heart skipped a beat. Instantly, she was up on her feet and rushing over to the woman, who was now sitting on the ground, looking stunned but not seriously injured. "Are you okay?" Rose asked, kneeling beside her. The woman winced but smiled reassuringly. "I'm fine, just a little shaken up. Thank you for helping me." Rose offered her a hand, helping the woman to her feet. "Of course. Are you sure you don't need help walking back to the bench?" The woman shook her head, grateful for the support but insisting she was okay. "I just lost my footing. I'm usually more careful." Rose smiled gently, realizing that sometimes, we all lose our footing, whether it's physical or emotional. Even the strongest among us stumble. She took a moment to think about her own journey and how, at times, she had felt as though she was falling. But she had learned how to get back up, just like this woman had. As they stood there for a moment, the woman turned to her and said, "You know, dear, getting older isn't easy. But it teaches you something important." "What's that?" Rose asked, curious. "It teaches you patience," the woman replied, her eyes sparkling. "You learn that things don't always happen the way you want, and sometimes, you have to wait for things to fall into place. But if you're patient, you find peace in the waiting." Rose returned home that afternoon with Liam, her mind buzzing with the woman's words. Patience. That was what she had been missing. She'd spent so much of her life rushing, trying to fix things immediately, trying to control outcomes. But the truth was, some things couldn't be hurried. Her health couldn't be rushed. Her healing couldn't be forced. That night, as she lay in bed, she thought about the long road ahead. She didn't know exactly what the future held, but she did know one thing. She couldn't force it. She had to trust that things would fall into place, that the progress she had made was real, and that she was on the right path. A few days later, she sat down with Liam after dinner, reflecting on her conversation with the elderly woman in the park. "You know, Liam, I think I've learned something important," Rose said, her voice calm and steady. "Sometimes, life takes time. We can't rush everything. We have to be patient with ourselves." Liam nodded, his young face serious as he listened. "I think I understand. Like when I'm trying to learn how to ride my bike. I didn't just get it right away, but I kept practicing, and now I can do it pretty well." Rose smiled at him. "Exactly. Healing, life, everything, it's all a process. And we just have to trust it." As the days passed, Rose embraced the lesson of patience more and more. She continued her routines, practiced mindfulness, and spent time with Liam, allowing herself to enjoy the journey without the pressure of rushing toward an ideal. There would be setbacks, there would be challenges, but in the grand scheme of things, they were all part of the same story. And the more she allowed herself to trust the process, the more peace she felt. For the first time in a long time, Rose was content with where she was, not because everything was perfect, but because she was finally allowing herself to just be. Rose's journey had come full circle. It hadn't been easy, and there were days when she felt like giving up. But she had persevered, finding strength in moments of vulnerability, and resilience in times of uncertainty. Now, as she stood at the edge of a new chapter in her life, she could feel the quiet satisfaction of progress. The afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting soft golden light across the living room. Liam was sitting at the kitchen table, scribbling away at his homework, while Rose sipped her tea on the couch, feeling more at peace than she had in a long time. As the days stretched out in front of her, Rose realized that the real victory wasn't just in overcoming the health issues that had plagued her for so long. It was in the quiet moments, the ones where she could just be. She could remember a time when she had been consumed by the need to constantly do, to always achieve, to never stop. But now, she had learned that sometimes, just being present was enough. Liam looked up from his homework, his face lit with curiosity. "Mom, do you think everything's going to be okay?" Rose smiled softly, a comforting warmth in her chest. It was a simple question, but it struck her to the core. How many times had she asked herself that very same question? How many sleepless nights had she spent wondering if things would ever turn out okay? "I think it already is," Rose replied, her voice steady and filled with certainty. Liam blinked in surprise. "Really?" Rose nodded, setting her tea aside. "You see, Liam, sometimes it's easy to get caught up in worrying about what's going to happen next. But right now, in this moment, things are okay. We're okay. And that's all we can really ask for. The rest will come in time, but we have to trust that we're doing the best we can, and that we're moving in the right direction." Liam's expression softened as he absorbed her words, and for a moment, they sat in silence together, just breathing in the quiet. The following weeks were filled with a calm that Rose had never really experienced before. Sure, life still had its challenges, but there was a certain kind of peace that came from knowing that she was no longer rushing to get somewhere. She was already where she needed to be. Her health had stabilized. She had learned to manage her stress, adjusted her medication with the help of her doctor, and found ways to nurture herself physically, emotionally, and mentally. It wasn't perfect, there would always be bumps in the road, but she had learned to embrace the journey, not just the destination. One morning, Rose received a call from Dr. Matthews. It was the kind of call she had learned to anticipate, but this time, the news was even better than she had hoped for. "Rose," Dr. Matthews said, "I have good news. Your latest test results show that your blood pressure has remained steady, and there are no new concerns. You're doing exactly what you need to do. Keep up with the routine, and we'll continue monitoring, but for now, things look great." Rose's heart lifted as she listened to the doctor's words. She had worked so hard for this moment, and it was finally here. She thanked Dr. Matthews and hung up the phone, taking a deep breath as she processed the news. Liam was sitting at the table, eating his breakfast, and when he saw the smile on his mother's face, he couldn't help but ask, "What's going on, Mom? You look so happy." Rose sat down across from him, her eyes glistening with emotion. "I'm happy because I know now that we're on the right path. I'm doing okay, and we're going to keep doing okay. Together." Liam's face lit up with a wide grin. "That's awesome, Mom. I'm proud of you." Rose's heart swelled with love for her son. "Thank you, Liam. You've been such a big part of this journey. You've helped me more than you'll ever know." They shared a moment of silence, just looking at each other with a deep, unspoken understanding. They had come through a lot together, but now, things were better. They were stronger, not just individually, but as a family. Later that afternoon, Rose and Liam took a walk in the park, something they had started doing regularly. It had become their ritual, a time to talk, to connect, and to simply be present in each other's company. They walked along the same path where Rose had helped the elderly woman, the same path where she had been reminded of the importance of patience and trusting the process. "Mom," Liam said as they walked side by side, "what's the next step for us? What are we going to do next?" Rose looked down at him and smiled. "The next step, Liam, is to keep living. To keep learning. We don't have to know exactly what's ahead, because we've got each other. And as long as we stay on this path, taking it one step at a time, we'll be just fine." Liam smiled, his young face radiating joy and peace. "I like that. Just one step at a time." As they walked in companionable silence, Rose thought about everything they had been through. She had come a long way. Her health, her mindset, and her relationship with Liam had all transformed. And she knew that life would continue to present challenges. But now, she faced those challenges with a newfound strength, knowing that she didn't have to go through it alone. Back at home, after their walk, Rose settled into the couch with a book, and Liam was working on his school projects in the next room. The house was calm, peaceful. For the first time in a long while, Rose felt as if everything was in its right place. She had spent so many years searching for answers, for fixes, for solutions. But now, she understood that the answer had always been right in front of her: patience, self-care, and living in the moment. There was no rush anymore. Rose had learned that it wasn't about perfection, or even about getting everything right. It was about accepting life as it came and choosing to face it with an open heart, with patience and grace. As the evening drew to a close, Rose reflected on everything she had learned. She had survived the storms. She had grown. And in the quiet moments of peace, she finally understood that life wasn't about avoiding the challenges, but about embracing them with faith in the journey and trust in herself. And for the first time in her life, Rose felt truly free. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?